The night I decided to dig up that box, the sky felt heavier than ever. Clouds pressed low over the roof, and the air carried that strange metallic smell that comes before a storm. I could feel it in my bones, the same way I'd felt things before they happened, all my life. Maybe it was age, maybe intuition, but that night, I knew I was about to uncover something I wasn't meant to see. It began 3 years ago when Clara first came to live with me. I was 74 then, and the house felt far too big for just one person. My husband, Richard, had passed a decade earlier, and my son was halfway across the world with his new family. The silence used to hum so loudly at night, it almost drove me mad. When the doctor said I needed help around the house, Clara appeared like an angel with an apron and a soft smile. She was in her late 30s, quiet, polite, and patient. The first thing I noticed about her was her hands, small, pale, and always cold, as if she'd just come in from the rain. She never talked much about her past. I respected that. We old folks carry our ghosts. I assumed she carried hers, too. For months, she cared for me like I was her own mother. She'd bring me tea in my favorite china cup, brush my hair every evening, hum old tunes while dusting the shelves. But one thing always bothered me. She was obsessed with the garden. Every morning before sunrise, she'd be out there pruning, trimming, watering, whispering to the plants as if they whispered back. At first, I thought it was sweet. But then, strange things started happening. One evening, I woke up to the sound of digging. It was around 2 a.m., and the moonlight poured through the curtains. I shuffled to the window and saw Clara in her nightdress, barefoot, standing in the middle of the garden. She was digging, a deep, deliberate hole. Something about the way she moved made my skin crawl. I almost called out, but then she froze, as if sensing my eyes on her. She turned her head slightly toward the house, and for a second, I swear she smiled. The next morning, the ground looked freshly covered. I asked her about it casually while having breakfast. She said she was planting bulbs. Autumn lilies, she told me. They grow better if planted deep. That was believable enough. But weeks went by and not a single shoot appeared. I tried to ignore it. But then one afternoon, while she was out buying groceries, I went into the garden to water the roses. Near that same patch of soil, I saw a piece of cloth poking out. Not from a bulb or a root, something else. It looked like the corner of a faded scarf. I knelt to pull it, but just as I did, I heard her footsteps on the gravel behind me. "Please don't touch that, Mrs. Weaver," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It's fragile." Her eyes weren't soft anymore. They were sharp, warning. That night, I locked my bedroom door for the first time since Richard died. The days turned colder, and so did our relationship. She became distant. No more humming, no more brushing my hair. Sometimes I'd catch her standing by that patch of earth, staring at it for long minutes, completely still. I began to avoid the garden altogether, but the memory of that buried cloth haunted me. Then came the whispering. I started hearing it at night, faint, muffled, as if someone was speaking through the walls. Once, I thought I heard my husband's name. Another time, it was my son's. The voices always came from the direction of the garden. Clara said I was imagining things, that I needed to rest more, but I could see the tiredness in her eyes, too. She was hiding something, and it was eating her alive. One evening, I woke to find my window open. A cold draft blew the curtains, and when I looked outside, I saw a lantern glowing faintly by the old oak. Clara was there again, kneeling, crying this time. She held something wrapped in a white cloth and pressed it into the ground. I couldn't see what it was, but I saw her trembling. That was the night I decided, whatever was buried there, I needed to know. Weeks passed before I had the strength to do it. My health was declining, and I didn't want to risk falling ill over curiosity. But after Clara abruptly quit one morning, leaving a note that said only, "I'm sorry for everything," the house felt emptier than ever. Her room smelled like lavender and rain, but there was something else, something metallic. When I opened her wardrobe, I found an old photograph of her standing beside a child, a little girl with bright eyes and a ribbon in her hair. On the back, in faded ink, it said, "For Clara and Maisie, forever." That night, I couldn't sleep. The garden was calling me again, whispering through the window like it had a voice of its own. So I lit a lantern, put on Richard's old coat, and walked out. The grass was wet, the air thick. I stood over that same patch of soil, the one that had haunted me for 3 years, and pressed the spade into the earth. The first dig was shallow, easy, but the deeper I went, the heavier it felt. The smell changed, too, like old wood and damp cloth. I could feel my hands trembling, my heart racing. Then the metal hit something solid. My breath caught. I knelt and brushed the soil away. Beneath the dirt was a small, rusted tin box, old, dented, with a red ribbon still tied around it. My lantern flickered, and for a moment I thought I saw movement behind me. But there was nothing, just the wind. I hesitated. My fingers hovered over the lid. I wanted to run inside, pretend I hadn't seen it. But something inside me, maybe loneliness, maybe madness, whispered, "Open it." So I did. Inside was a folded note, a locket, and something else, a tiny, yellowed hospital bracelet. My throat went dry as I read the name printed on it. It said, Maisie Weaver. My name. I felt the ground tilt beneath me. The locket fell open, and inside was a picture of a baby that looked exactly like me. I remember gasping, clutching my chest. "No," I whispered. "That can't be." But deep down, I already knew, because I'd seen that same baby before, in my mother's album, in my childhood drawings. And in that moment, the truth began to unravel, slow and cruel, like thread pulling loose from an old sweater. I wasn't digging up Clara's secret. I was digging up mine. The night I opened that box, I sat on the cold ground for what felt like hours. The air was still, and the only sound was the rustling of leaves above me. I kept staring at that hospital bracelet, turning it over and over in my trembling hands. My name, Maisie Weaver, was printed clearly in faded ink. Date of birth, time, and the hospital's name, St. Elora Maternity Ward. I hadn't heard that name in decades. My mother used to speak of St. Elora only once, and with such bitterness that I learned never to ask again. But what on earth was my hospital bracelet doing buried in my garden, tied with a red ribbon and hidden by my caretaker? I brought the box inside, washed the dirt from my hands, and sat by the kitchen table. My mind was racing, full of ghosts and fragments of memories I hadn't visited in years. I remembered my mother's shaky hands when she'd brushed my hair, the way she'd always avoided my questions about my birth. I remembered her whispering one night, when she thought I was asleep, something about switching the babies, and it was for the best. I thought it was just a dream. But now, staring at that box, I wasn't so sure anymore. The next morning, I called the hospital. A woman's polite voice answered, and I asked if their archives went back to 1947. There was a pause, then a sigh. "Most of those records were lost in a fire, ma'am," she said, "but I can check what we have." I waited 3 long days before she called back. "We have one record under the name Maisie Weaver, born January 3rd, 1947, she said. "But there's a note attached. It says the child was transferred for adoption after the mother's death. I nearly dropped the phone. Adoption? I whispered. No, there must be some mistake. My mother, Margaret Weaver, she raised me herself. But the woman only said softly, I'm sorry, ma'am. That's all it says. After that call, the world didn't feel steady anymore. I sat by the window for hours, staring out at the garden. The patch of earth where I'd dug still looked disturbed, like a wound that hadn't healed. My hands kept shaking. I thought of Clara, the way she'd cried while digging, the way she'd looked at me sometimes, like she wanted to say something but couldn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the locket and that tiny bracelet. Around 2 a.m., I got up to make tea, but when I walked past the living room, I froze. The back door was open. I could have sworn I'd locked it. The wind pushed it gently, creaking on its hinges. I stepped closer, heart pounding. Outside, under the faint moonlight, the garden looked darker than usual. But then I saw it, a figure standing by the oak. For a second, I thought it was a shadow, but then it moved. I called out, "Who's there?" My voice cracked like dry wood. The figure turned, and even from that distance, I knew who it was. Clara. She looked thinner, pale, her eyes sunken but filled with something wild. She raised a trembling hand. "Mrs. Weaver," she whispered, her voice almost lost to the wind. "I didn't mean for you to find it." I stepped outside, clutching the doorframe for balance. "Why, Clara? Why bury that in my garden? That bracelet? How did you get it?" Tears spilled down her face. "Because it didn't belong to me," she said. "It belonged to you." The ground felt like it shifted under my feet. "What are you talking about?" I whispered. She took a deep breath, as if gathering years of silence into one confession. "I was born in St. Elora, too, 1947. My mother worked there as a nurse. She told me a story once, about 2 babies born the same night, one healthy, one weak. The weak one belonged to a woman who died during birth. The healthy one belonged to a wealthy family who didn't want to keep her." I stared at her, unable to breathe. "She said the babies were switched," Clara continued. "The sick one was sent away under a new name, and the healthy one was kept, raised in comfort. She said she did it out of mercy." I felt my knees weaken. "Are you saying—" Clara nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "Mrs. Weaver, I think I was supposed to be you." For a moment, everything around me disappeared. The trees, the wind, even the cold biting my skin. It was just me and her, 2 women standing in the garden, bound by something neither of us could explain. I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. "That's impossible. My mother, she couldn't have known." Clara stepped closer. "I think she did. My mother told me your mother came back to the hospital days later, asking to see the babies again. She was told the healthy child had died. They lied to her." My hands flew to my mouth. I wanted to scream, to deny it, but the truth was clawing its way out of the dirt just like that box. "Then why?" I asked. "Why bury the box here? Why hide it from me?" Clara's voice cracked. "Because I found it years ago. My mother kept it all her life. Your bracelet, your locket, the note she never sent. When she died, I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't want to destroy it. So when I came to work for you, I thought it was fate. I thought maybe I could bring peace to her memory by being close to you. But when I saw your kindness, your home, your life, I couldn't face the truth. I buried it, hoping it would stay buried forever." I felt something inside me break. I turned away, tears blurring my vision. So all these years, my life wasn't mine to begin with. She shook her head desperately. No, Mrs. Weaver, you earned it. You lived it. Whatever happened back then, it wasn't your fault. Or mine. But it didn't matter. Every memory suddenly felt borrowed. Every photograph like a stolen smile. I walked past her slowly back into the house. I didn't slam the door, I just closed it quietly, leaving her standing under the moonlight, trembling like a ghost. That night, I sat on my bed holding the box again. I opened the locket and stared at the baby inside. A strange warmth filled my chest, not anger, not pity, but sorrow for both of us. 2 lives twisted by one terrible choice. I thought I'd never see her again, but I was wrong. Because the next morning, the police came. They said a woman had been found near the river at dawn. She drowned. No signs of struggle, just a note in her pocket. It read, "Tell Mrs. Weaver I found her story. She deserves to live it." My heart shattered. For the next few weeks, I barely spoke. I sat in the garden often, near that same patch of earth. Sometimes I thought I could still hear her humming faintly through the wind, the same tune she used to hum while brushing my hair. One afternoon, I took the box, placed it back into the soil, and covered it gently. "Rest now," I whispered. "Both of us." But as I turned to leave, I noticed something glinting in the sunlight. A second bracelet, half buried, smaller, delicate. I brushed the dirt away and gasped. It said, "Clara Elora." I stared at the bracelet until my vision blurred. The letters Clara Elora were etched so faintly I had to hold it against the light to read them. The metal was old, tarnished, and bent from years underground. My hands trembled as I held it, realizing what it meant. There had been 2 bracelets all along. 2 babies, 2 names. 2 lives reversed by one cruel decision. The world felt heavy around me, like the air itself was trying to keep the truth buried. I sank to my knees in the dirt, clutching that tiny band, and whispered her name. Clara. The wind rustled through the trees, soft and mournful, as if she was still there somewhere, listening. For days, I couldn't focus on anything else. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind sounded like her voice. My tea went cold untouched, letters piled up unopened. I barely slept, haunted by the image of her standing in the garden that last night, her eyes filled with guilt and something deeper, something that felt almost like love. Then one morning, the phone rang. It was the same woman from the hospital archives. "Mrs. Weaver," she said carefully, "we found an additional file fragment during our restoration process. It's marked confidential, but it mentions both your name and another infant, Clara Elora." My throat went dry. "Can I see it?" "It's not supposed to be released," she replied, "but I can read what's legible." Papers shuffled faintly over the line. "It says here that 2 infants were admitted the same night. One mother deceased, name Eleanor Clark. The other, Margaret Weaver. A note in the margin says, 'Infant transferred to foster care after incident.' There's also a handwritten remark by the head nurse." "What does it say?" I whispered. She hesitated. "It says, 'The switch is done. God forgive me.'" I felt the air leave my lungs. The room spun around me. "The switch," I repeated numbly. "The switch is done." It was real. Clara hadn't been imagining anything. The story she carried, the guilt her mother bore, it all happened. When I hung up, I couldn't sit still. I found myself drawn back to the garden again. The ground looked peaceful, but beneath it lay a grave of secrets spanning 70 years. I knelt by the oak tree and traced my fingers across the soil where the box once lay. "You didn't have to die for this," I whispered. "You were already part of me." But that wasn't the end. A few days later, I received a small envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph, grainy and old, clearly taken in a hospital room. 2 women stood side by side, both holding infants wrapped in white cloth. One of them was my mother. The other was Clara's. And behind them, in the corner of the frame, stood a man I didn't recognize, but his eyes were cold and deliberate, watching. On the back of the photo were just 3 words. He knew everything. My hands began to shake. Who was he? I turned the photograph over and over, trying to place the face. Something about him felt familiar, the sharp jawline, the slight smirk. Then it hit me like lightning. I had seen that man before, in an old photograph of my father's medical colleagues. Dr. Adrian Moss, the chief physician at St. Elora Hospital. The realization made my blood run cold. He wasn't just some background figure. He was the one who signed my birth certificate. The man who told my mother her baby had died. The man who must have authorized the switch. I couldn't breathe. Every part of me wanted to scream, but I was too old for rage. All I could do was cry. Cry for Clara, for myself, for 2 mothers who never got to raise the daughters they bore. That night, I searched through Richard's old trunk in the attic. He'd kept files from his days as a solicitor, yellowed letters, case records, hospital correspondences. Buried beneath them all, I found a file marked St. Elora Inquiry, 1948. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were complaint letters written by families whose newborns had mysteriously disappeared or been reassigned. Dozens of names. I scanned them quickly, my heart in my throat. Most had been silenced, cases dismissed for lack of evidence. But there, at the very bottom, was my mother's signature. Margaret Weaver. Her letter was short, only 2 paragraphs, but I read it over and over. I know, something is wrong. The bracelet doesn't match. The baby they gave me isn't the same. I remember her cry. It was higher, softer. This one sounds different. Please, someone must tell me the truth before it's too late. And beneath her shaky handwriting was a red stamp. Case closed. I pressed the letter to my chest and sobbed. My mother knew. She'd tried to fight it, tried to tell someone, but they buried her truth the same way Clara buried that box. The guilt clawed at me. Clara had lived a life of servitude and sorrow, caring for a woman who unknowingly lived her life. I had everything she was meant to have: home, family, love. And she had nothing but her mother's sins to carry. And yet, she never took revenge. She only cared for me until her heart couldn't bear it anymore. In the following weeks, I couldn't stay still. I visited St. Elora's ruins, an abandoned shell of cracked walls and ivy-covered bricks. The air inside smelled of mold and memory. I walked the corridors, touching the faded signs: maternity ward, records office, nursery. I half expected to hear a baby's cry echo through the halls. Then, near the end of the corridor, I found a small brass plaque half buried under rubble. It read, "In memory of the mothers who lost their children here, 1947. I knelt beside it, tears slipping down my cheeks. I whispered, "You didn't lose them. They just found each other too late." When I came home, I made one last decision. I gathered the 2 bracelets, the photo, and the letters. I placed them in the tin box again, tied the same red ribbon around it, and sealed it shut. Then I walked to the garden and dug a deeper hole under the oak, deeper than before, deep enough that no storm could ever uncover it again. As I placed the box inside, I whispered, "This time, it stays buried, not in shame, but in peace." The wind brushed my face softly, almost like a hand. I could have sworn I heard Clara's voice in it, faint and warm. "Thank you." I stood there until dusk, watching the last rays of sunlight fade behind the fence. I realized that the garden wasn't cursed. It was sacred, a place where 2 lives, divided at birth, had finally come together in truth. But that night, when I closed my eyes, I saw a dream that made my heart ache. I was young again, holding a baby in a white blanket, and beside me stood another woman, Clara's mother, smiling through tears. We looked at each other, and in that silence, something passed between us. A forgiveness too deep for words. When I woke up, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I knew who I really was. Not stolen, not switched, just found. The morning after I buried the box again, the house felt quieter than ever. It wasn't just silence. It was the kind that sinks into the walls, that hums through the furniture, that watches you while you breathe. I woke before dawn, the sky still a pale shade of ash, and for a while I simply sat on the clay edge of the bed, listening to the ticking of the old clock Richard had loved so much. My reflection in the mirror looked strange to me that morning, familiar but foreign. The same gray hair, the same tired eyes, yet behind them I saw someone else. Not just Maisie Weaver, the widow, but a woman whose life had been rearranged by other people's choices. I whispered to my reflection, "Who were you supposed to be, Clara?" Her name lingered in the air like a sigh. The funeral notice had come the day before. It was short, almost cruelly so. No family listed, no flowers requested, just a small announcement in the local paper. Clara Elora, beloved caregiver and friend, laid to rest at Hillview Cemetery. I knew I had to go, even if no one else did. The next morning, I dressed carefully in my black coat, pinned Richard's old brooch to the lapel, and took the bus to Hillview. It was a quiet place, rows of weathered stones surrounded by oak trees, the ground damp from last night's rain. The smell of earth and pine hung in the air. Her grave was near the back, marked by a simple wooden cross. No flowers, no inscription except her name burned into the wood. I knelt slowly, my knees creaking, and placed a small bouquet of lilies beside it. My fingers brushed the damp soil as I whispered, "You should have had roses, Clara. You deserved more than this." The breeze rustled softly, and for a moment, I imagined she was standing beside me, her soft voice saying, "It's all right, Mrs. Weaver. I never wanted much." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. "You should have told me sooner," I murmured. "You shouldn't have carried this alone." As I sat there, I felt something pressing against my coat pocket. I'd almost forgotten. I'd brought her photograph, the one I'd found in her wardrobe. Clara and her little girl, both smiling, both unaware of the storm that would one day drown them. I took it out and set it gently on her grave. She looked just like you, I said softly. If she's somewhere safe, I hope she knows who you were. When I stood to leave, I noticed an old man a few rows away, laying flowers at another grave. He watched me for a moment, then slowly walked over, his cane tapping against the stones. His face was kind but lined with the weight of years. You knew her? He asked quietly. Yes, I replied. She worked for me. She took care of me for 3 years. He nodded solemnly. Good woman, that one. I used to see her come here every month, always standing right where you are now. Same spot. I frowned. But this is her grave. He shook his head slowly. Not before. She used to stand over that one. He pointed a few feet away, to a faded stone almost buried in moss. I brushed the leaves aside and read the name carved faintly into the marble. Eleanor Clark, Clara's mother. My chest tightened. She came here to visit her mother. The old man nodded. Every month, rain or shine. Always left a little white box there. I used to wonder what was in it. I didn't need to wonder anymore. I knew. When I left the cemetery that day, I felt the pull of unfinished business. Back home, I went to the attic again, where boxes of memories waited like unopened wounds. I searched for hours through old albums, diaries, letters, anything that might tell me what my mother had truly known. Then, buried under a pile of yellowed pages, I found it. A small, leather-bound diary. My mother's handwriting on the cover, Margaret W. My hands trembled as I opened it. The entries were sparse at first, recipes, weather notes, names of visitors. But near the end, the tone changed. The handwriting became frantic, words pressed deep into the paper as if she'd written them through tears. They told me she's mine, but my heart knows different. When I look into her eyes, I see another woman's sorrow staring back at me. I dreamed last night of the hospital, the crying, the nurse's face. There were 2 babies, I know it. God forgive me, but sometimes when I hold her, I feel like I'm holding someone else's child. I had to stop reading for a moment. My breath came in shallow gasps. My mother had lived with the same confusion that haunted me now. But then, one final entry changed everything. If she ever finds this, I want her to know I loved her as my own. No matter what they did, no matter where she came from, she was my daughter, and I would choose her again. I pressed the diary to my chest and sobbed until my voice was gone. I realized in that moment that love wasn't stolen. It was given, freely, even when it began in lies. My mother might not have birthed me, but she had raised me, fought for me, and loved me when no one else could. Later that night, I lit a candle in the window and placed the diary beside it. The flame flickered softly, casting long shadows across the room. For the first time in months, I didn't feel haunted. I felt accompanied. Like both women, my mother and Clara's were standing beside me in that quiet house, finally at peace. But peace is a fragile thing, because a week later, I received a letter that shattered everything I thought was settled. It came in a plain envelope with no return address, but the handwriting stopped me cold. I would have recognized it anywhere. Clara's handwriting. The letter was dated 2 days before her death. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. The paper smelled faintly of lavender, like her room always did. Mrs. Weaver, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't say goodbye in person. Please forgive me for what I've done. I couldn't live with the truth anymore, but I couldn't let it die with me either. There's one more thing you should know. My mother didn't act alone. Someone else arranged the switch, and he's still alive. The last line was smudged, but I could still read it. Look for the initials A.M. A. Chill ran through me. A.M. Dr. Adrian Moss. The man in the photograph. The man who'd orchestrated everything. I looked out the window toward the garden, the wind stirring the branches of the oak. For years, I thought all the ghosts I carried were buried beneath that soil. But now I knew. One of them was still walking somewhere, breathing, waiting to be found. And this time, I wouldn't stop digging. After reading Clara's letter, I couldn't sit still. The name Adrian Moss echoed through my head like a curse. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cold smirk in the old photograph, the one standing behind the two mothers who had trusted him. My hands trembled as I folded the letter back into its envelope. He was still alive. That meant the story wasn't over, not for Clara, and certainly not for me. I spent the next morning calling every number I could find. Hospitals, retirement directories, even the medical board archives. Most people had never heard of him. A few hung up before I could explain. It wasn't until late afternoon that I got a lead. A receptionist at a small nursing home on the outskirts of town said quietly, "Dr. Moss? Yes, we have a resident by that name. Adrian Moss, 94 years old." My heart skipped a beat. 94, and still alive. I thanked her, hung up, and stared out the window. The garden looked peaceful under the afternoon sun, as if nothing dark had ever touched it. But I knew better. I knew that somewhere in that calm sky, a storm was waiting for me. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing the same black coat I'd worn to Clara's funeral. As I left the house, I whispered to the wind, "This is for you, Clara." The nursing home was quiet, clean, almost sterile. The smell of disinfectant stung my nose as I walked down the corridor. The nurse at the desk led me to a small room at the end of the hall. "He doesn't talk much," she said. "Some days he doesn't even remember his own name, but maybe you'll get lucky." I stepped inside. He was sitting in a wheelchair by the window, his back to me. A thin man, fragile, his skin pale and spotted like old paper. But when he turned his head, I recognized those eyes. Cold, intelligent, and still calculating even in old age. "Dr. Moss," I said softly. He blinked, his voice a rasp. "Who are you?" "My name is Maisie Weaver." He froze. The faintest twitch crossed his mouth, a memory trying to claw its way out. "Weaver," he repeated slowly. "Margaret Weaver?" "No," I said. "Her daughter." The silence between us was suffocating. I took a step closer. "You switched 2 babies at St. Elora Hospital. You destroyed 2 lives and buried the truth for decades. I want to know why." His expression didn't change at first. Then he gave a faint, tired laugh. "You came all this way for a why? At my age, why hardly matters." "It matters to me," I said firmly. "It mattered to Clara." At her name, his eyes flickered with something. Regret or recognition? I couldn't tell. He coughed, his frail hands trembling. "Clara, the nurse's child. Always asking questions she shouldn't. Like mother, like daughter." I clenched my fists. "She's dead because of you, because she couldn't live with what you did." He sighed, looking out the window. "We all made choices we thought were right at the time. The hospital was complicated back then. There were debts, blackmail, politics. Your mother was a donor's wife. Her baby was born weak, dying. The other woman, Eleanor Clark, was poor, unmarried, and her child was healthy. A scandal was brewing. The board decided to cover it up, I interrupted, by swapping them. He nodded faintly. The child of the benefactor lived. The child of the nurse disappeared. Everyone got to keep their reputation. I was told it was mercy. But mercy is just another word for control, isn't it? His words chilled me to the core. You lied to both women. You watched one mourn a child that wasn't hers and let another raise one she didn't birth. He turned toward me then, his eyes cloudy but sharp. And yet here you stand, alive, loved, fed, safe. Tell me, Mrs. Weaver, would you rather have lived as Clara did, in poverty, or as you did, in comfort? My voice shook. It's not about comfort. It's about truth. For the first time, his mask slipped. Truth, he whispered bitterly. The truth ruins lives. I kept the world neat and orderly. I did what needed to be done. I felt something inside me snap. I walked closer, leaning over his chair until our faces were inches apart. You didn't save anyone, Doctor. You played God, and you left 2 women to live in lies. Clara carried your sin her whole life, and now she's gone. He stared at me for a long time. Then, with a trembling hand, he reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. I kept one thing, he murmured. A note I was supposed to burn. He handed it to me, and for a moment I hesitated. Then I opened it carefully. The handwriting was delicate but unmistakable. My mother's. If this reaches you, please tell her, tell Maisie, that I know. I forgive you. But don't let her live in ignorance. She deserves her truth. Tears blurred my vision. You had this? All this time? He nodded weakly. I told myself it was for your own good. The past is a disease, Mrs. Weaver. Once you dig it up, it spreads. I folded the note, my hands trembling. Then I suppose I'm already infected. He gave a small, broken laugh, then leaned back in his chair. You sound like her, he said softly. Like both of them. When I left, the nurse asked if I was all right. I didn't answer. Outside, the world looked different, brighter, somehow cruelly alive. I stood by the garden outside the home, holding the letter tight against my chest. And for the first time, I felt something strange. Not just grief, but release. That night, back in my house, I placed the letter on the kitchen table beside Clara's photograph. You were right, I whispered. He did it. He stole both our lives. The wind outside picked up, rattling the window. The old oak tree swayed, its branches brushing the glass. I closed my eyes and imagined Clara's voice again, soft, forgiving, the way she sounded before everything unraveled. It's over now, Mrs. Weaver. You found it. But even as I whispered back, yes, it's over, I knew it wasn't. Because the next morning, when I went to the garden to water the roses, I noticed something strange near the spot where I'd buried the box. The soil had been disturbed. Again. There, half buried in the dirt, was another envelope. No footprints, no sign of intrusion, Just an envelope pressed neatly into the earth, my name written in Clara's handwriting. My hands trembled as I reached for it. Inside was a single sentence, scrawled hastily in blue ink. He wasn't the only one. I stood there, frozen, the letter fluttering in my hand as the wind howled through the garden. The earth beneath my feet suddenly felt alive again, breathing, shifting, hiding something deeper still. For hours, I just stood there, staring at that note. The words, "He wasn't the only one," spun around my mind like a cruel whisper that wouldn't stop echoing. The morning air felt thick and cold, the sky heavy with clouds. I couldn't feel my hands. Whoever had left that envelope, they knew where I'd buried the box, knew my name, knew Clara's handwriting well enough to imitate it, or worse, had found something she'd written before she died. I went back inside and sat at the kitchen table, the note trembling between my fingers. "Who else could there be?" I whispered. The house didn't answer. Only the old clock ticked, steady and uncaring, as if time itself was mocking me. I went through everything again, every letter, every photograph, every record from St. Elora. Adrian Moss was the puppet master, but there had been others in the photograph. Nurses, administrators, my mother, Clara's mother, and one more face I hadn't noticed before, a shadow standing half-cropped at the edge of the picture, wearing a distinctive brooch. A brooch shaped like a crescent moon. Something in me stirred. I knew that brooch. I ran upstairs to my bedroom, opened the old jewelry box on my dresser, and pulled out the same crescent-shaped brooch. It had belonged to my mother. "My dear friend gave this to me," she used to say. "She was with me when you were born." The friend's name had always escaped me, but now, the memory came back with a sudden, terrible clarity. Agatha Moss, Adrian's wife. My breath hitched. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, the room spinning around me. His wife. The man who orchestrated the switch and the woman who had comforted my mother during it. They had both been there, both complicit, both smiling in that old photograph like they'd done something noble. It wasn't a hospital mistake. It was a family crime. I went back to the letter Clara had left me, the one that mentioned A.M. Now it made sense. It wasn't just Adrian Moss. It was Adrian and Agatha Moss. I needed proof. I couldn't rest without it. The next morning, I took a taxi back to the nursing home. The receptionist frowned when she saw me. "You were just here," she said. "I'm afraid Dr. Moss passed away early this morning." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The timing was too perfect. Almost like he had waited until the truth had been unearthed before finally letting go. "Was there anything left behind?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Actually, yes, a small parcel addressed to you." She handed me a brown envelope sealed with wax. My fingers shook as I broke it open. Inside was a letter written in shaky handwriting. "Mrs. Weaver, if you've found this, then you know more than I ever intended anyone to. My wife, Agatha, was the one who convinced me to go through with the switch. She feared scandal. Eleanor Clark's child was mine, born from a mistake I made and could never admit. Agatha knew, and instead of exposing me, she devised the trade. One mother buried her child in sorrow, the other raised mine in love. I told myself it was justice, but it was cowardice. Clara was my daughter, and you, Mrs. Weaver, were the innocent consequence of my sin. Tell her spirit I'm sorry. Tell both mothers they can rest. A.M." The words blurred through my tears. I felt the world tilt beneath me as every truth I had chased came crashing together in one unbearable revelation. Clara wasn't just the woman who had cared for me. She was his child. His daughter. The same man who stole my life had been her father all along. The garden, the box, the buried secrets, it all led back to him. And she had known. She had carried the shame of her father's crime, and still she had cared for me. I don't remember how I got home that evening. I just remember sitting by the window, the letter clutched in my hands, watching the sun sink behind the oak tree. The sky was streaked with gold and red, like the earth itself was bleeding out the truth. I whispered into the silence, "You were the daughter he stole, and I was the lie he built." That night I couldn't sleep. I felt her presence everywhere, the faint scent of lavender, the soft creak of footsteps down the hall, the whisper of her name in the wind. I went outside in my robe, barefoot, the cold biting my skin. The moon hung low, silver and watchful. I knelt by the garden again and began to dig, not out of fear or curiosity, but out of love. I unearthed the box one final time. My hands were raw, my breath shallow. I opened it slowly, expecting only the bracelets, the locket, and the notes I'd buried before. But there was something new inside, a folded piece of paper wrapped in plastic. My heart stilled as I unfolded it. It was a birth certificate. 2 names written on it side by side. Mother, Eleanor Clark. Father, Adrian Moss. Child, Clara Elora Moss. Below it, handwritten in blue ink, another line had been added, barely legible through smudged tears. And her sister, by heart, if not by blood. Maisie. I pressed the paper to my chest and broke down completely. The earth around me seemed to breathe with me, the wind rising and falling like a sigh. I whispered through my sobs, "We were sisters, Clara. We were meant to find each other." When the dawn came, I sat there still, wrapped in my shawl, the box open beside me. The birds began to sing softly, as if the garden itself was waking up after years of silence. I took one of the lilies from her grave and placed it gently into the box beside the bracelets. Then I buried it again, deeper than ever, under the roots of the old oak tree. This time, it wasn't a grave. It was a resting place. As I stood, the first light touched the garden, golden and forgiving. I could almost see her standing there, smiling faintly, her hair catching the morning light, her eyes full of peace. I whispered, "It's done now, Clara. It's all over." The wind stirred the leaves, soft and kind, and for a moment I could swear I heard her voice again. "No, Mrs. Weaver. It's just beginning." I smiled through my tears. "Then let it begin in peace." I walked back to the house slowly, the weight that had haunted me for 70 years finally lifting from my shoulders. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the garden glow under the morning sun. The oak tree stood tall and proud, its roots deep, its branches stretching toward the light, just like the truth, no matter how long it takes to surface. And as I sipped my tea, I whispered one last time, to no one and to everyone. Some stories aren't meant to be forgotten. Some are meant to be found, one shovelful of truth at a time. The wind answered softly, carrying her name through the open window. Clara. And in that moment I knew the garden would